And there's been this insistence, and I don't think it's a misunderstanding, I think it's a strategy, to turn this into a debate over censorship, because everybody hates censors. Everybody wants to celebrate world cinema and so on. Nobody's calling for the boycott of TIFF. Nobody's trying to silence any films. But it's much easier to sort of try to derail the conversation and turn it into a censorship battle. And that's what the quote you just read is trying to do very deliberately.
So you have these two quotes. You have one of the signers of the Toronto Declaration, Viggo Mortensen, who says, let's see if I can find the quote. "The statement does not promote the boycotting or censorship of any artist or movie from Israel or anywhere else. Those who have attacked the statement with that accusation are simply spreading misinformation, unfortunately continuing the ongoing successful distraction from the issue at hand. The Israeli government's whitewashing of their illegal and inhumane actions inside and outside their legal national borders." And then you have the award-winning filmmaker Robert Lantos, who says, "We are not talking about the West Bank or the Golan Heights here, but the biggest population center in the heart of Israel, where the first neighborhood was built in 1887. If that's disputed territory, then Ms. Klein and her armchair stormtroopers are clamoring for nothing short of the annihilation of the Jewish state. They are effectively Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's local fifth column."
Yeah, it's been a fun week, I have to say. Yeah, that's actually the most powerful man in Canadian film and media saying that. And it's an extraordinary lie on every level. I mean, there's so many lies in that statement. The reason why we're not singling out Tel Aviv. The festival singled out Tel Aviv, and it's acting as if this is an apolitical decision. When you read the program, it says Tel Aviv is the economic and cultural center of Israel and doesn't mention occupation once, actually doesn't mention Palestinians once. It's just this sort of light, frothy, breezy discussion of a city filled with cafes. And it even says, there's an interview with one of the filmmakers who talks about Tel Aviv as a place where you can go when you don't want to think about the conflict 24/7. So it's really this idea that you can sort of lift Tel Aviv out of the context of Israel, out of the context of the conflict, and just turn it into this apolitical space. The defense ministry is located in Tel Aviv. Fighter jets during the bombing of Gaza departed from the Air Force very close to Tel Aviv, and people protested, Israeli peace activists protested at the airbase and to try to reach the pilots and tell them, what you're about to do is commit war crimes. You can't lift Tel Aviv out of Israel. And the idea that by objecting to the spotlight, we're objecting to the existence of Tel Aviv, which is what he's saying, is just diversion on a mass scale. And it's very, very unfortunate because, as you said, people like Jane Fonda have signed the letter. And the most dishonest smear campaign has been launched, directed at them. There was a headline on a bunch of gossip sites like TMZ and Perez Hilton last week that literally said Jane Fonda calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, which is so absurd. This is somebody who supported a two-state solution her whole life. And this is not a misunderstanding, once again. This is about discrediting everyone who dares to speak out on Israel, who dares to reject this narrative of normalcy, and the truth really appears not to matter.
Naomi Klein, we're going to break and then come back to this discussion. Naomi Klein, journalist, author of The Shock Doctrine and No Logo. She helped launch the No Celebration of Occupation protest at the Toronto International Film Festival. That's taking place as we speak. We are joined by Naomi Klein, author of The Shock Doctrine and No Logo. She has a cover story of Harper's Magazine, as well as a big piece in The Guardian in Britain. Naomi, you went to Gaza earlier this summer to witness the aftermath of the Israeli attack on Gaza. I wanted to play the comments of Jessica Montel, executive director of the Israeli human rights group at Tselem. Last week, the group released a report on the toll from the Gaza assault. The report backs Palestinian findings that over half the 1,400 Palestinian victims were civilians, including 240 children.
The discrepancy between what the Israeli army has reported and what B'Tselem's research has revealed is quite disturbing. The most blatant example regarding children under the age of 16, the Israeli military has claimed that 89 Palestinian children under 16 were killed in Operation Cast Lead. B'Tselem visited families, took death certificates, testimonies, other information from the families on 240 Palestinian children under 16 killed.
That's Jessica Mantel of B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group. Naomi, you recently came back from Gaza, and just before we go to your piece on Jews, blacks, and the, quote, post-racial presidency in Harper's, I want to ask you about that trip.
Well, in many ways, this is for me. This is why I'm involved in this whole mess around the Toronto International Film Festival. Because when I was in Gaza, I was so struck by the fact that Gazans felt that people had forgotten them, and I was told something that really stayed with me. I was working with the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. They were taking me around, and we had a discussion with a group of NGO leaders, women's rights leaders. And one of the things that was said to me was that there was actually more hope during the attack, which seemed than there was now, than there was in the aftermath, which just blindsided me. I mean, how could you say that? How could you say that there was more hope while bombs and missiles were falling when those children were being killed than there is now? And the answer was that when Gazans turned on their televisions, you know, in any kind of war, people who can are watching television to try to get any kind of information they can or listen to the radio. And in addition to the carnage that they were hearing about, they were also hearing reports of a world enraged. They were hearing about those protesters in London, in cities around the world, just rejecting Israel's actions, not buying that this was a defensive war. They heard reports of women in my city, in Toronto, occupying the consul general's office. Jewish women did this and stayed, and it was an incredible action. And so what I was told by people who I spoke to in Gaza was that there was a feeling that if they could survive these horrific attacks, this would be the turning point, that people were seeing the lawlessness, the brutality of the occupation, and there would be a demand for a new era, that the siege on Gaza, for instance, would have to be lifted. Here they were 6 months later, now 8 months later, and the illegal siege on Gaza continued. There was no justice on the way. I mean, Gaza felt to me like a massive crime scene, but that was being tampered with because the police hadn't shown up, and just the outrage that such brutality, such open brutality, hadn't led to any kind of justice, and that's really what struck with me. So when I got back to the city where I live, Toronto, and found out that we were planning to throw a big party for the State of Israel at our premier cultural event, the Toronto International Film Festival, that's what prompted me to get involved in this protest. Not that I enjoy being called Ahmadinejad's fifth column, I really don't. But I feel a sort of moral responsibility, having witnessed this sense from so many people in Gaza that these terrible crimes that we just heard about from B'Tselem had been forgotten, and that there was no justice. And when governments fail, when the international community fails, when the UN fails to bring justice, then people have to step in and fill that gap, that vacuum. And that's happened in the past, and it's going to happen again. And this is, I think, why there is such an incredible fear and backlash against attempts to put other kinds of pressure on the State of Israel, not to just leave it up to Obama to talk to Netanyahu and hope that it works out. People are seeing the failure of just high-level moral suasion. And we know that there are other tools in the diplomatic arsenal besides just talk, besides just Obama suggesting to Netanyahu that maybe he shouldn't build more settlements and Netanyahu proceeding to ignore him. There's billions in military aid. There are all of these honors that are given to countries and all of these relationships. And all of them are treated, as, when it comes to Israel, as completely untouchable. And there is an international movement that's growing that is saying, actually, they're not untouchable. We need to use all of these levers in the case of Israel, just as we have the right to use them in the case of any other country that refuses to abide by international law.
今年2009年はガザ地区に対するイスラエル軍の侵攻で明けました。そしてその犠牲者の多くは何の罪もないパレスチナの一般市民たちでした。民間人に対する攻撃はジュネーブ条約で禁止されています。しかし世界各地の紛争でジュネーブ条約に違反する残虐な戦闘が繰り返されているのも事実です。インタビューの中でガザの人々は世界の人々に忘れないでほしいと願っている、 とナオミ・クライン氏は言っていました。ゴールドストーン判事たちが設定した国内での調査の期限である来年3月を迎えれば、また安保理でガザ侵攻が議論されるでしょう。この時ガザ侵攻の被害者たちを忘れてしまうのか、それともしっかり法の制御を実現させられるのか、決めるのはガザの人々ではなく安保理メンバーの政府です。日本もその一つ。私たち日本人の責任も重いと感じます。